Hello! So, today we are talking about Tender is the Flesh. This is a book by an Argentinian author, Agustina Basterrica. It has been very controversial online in bookish circles. It is extremely graphic. I will be spoiling this book. This is not really a spoilable book because the premise pretty much is the book, but I will be talking about it in depth. So if you would prefer to read the book first and you have not yet, then save this video and come back, I guess. If you are not familiar with the premise, this is a kind of near future dystopia in which we have switched to factory farming humans instead of animals. So there is a virus that has impacted all animal life on the planet, and it makes it toxic to humans to eat or even to be scratched by an animal or anything. So they have fully transitioned to cannibalism as a society in order to continue to have meat to eat because they say that it is not possible to survive without it. So this is, as you might guess from the premise, a very, very disturbing book, and it is extremely explicit, like no holds barred whatsoever. So this book, I'm just gonna be honest, has been, I feel like, one of the most misunderstood books I've ever seen in my life. I see so many people online missing the point of this book so hard, so intensely, and it makes me crazy. So we are going to go through some reviews of this and talk about some of the things that I think that they missed or didn't understand, and also some things that I do think are valid points. So I did collect a bunch of screenshots and we will just be going through them. The first one, we just have to get rid of the elephant in the room, and again, this is a spoiler, but people talk about this a lot as if it is this fundamental flaw of the book that there's no way that you could have a virus that would impact all types of animals on the planet and not impact humans. Like, it's not biologically plausible. And so this Goodreads question regarding the book was, why are reviewers not acknowledging the fact that the entire premise is utterly ridiculous? A virus that can get past the immune system of every animal except human. Blah, blah, blah. This is addressed in the book. Every time someone says this, I question whether they actually paid attention or actually read the book. In literally the very first chapter, it talks about the fact that the main character and many other people believe that this was a government conspiracy in order to deal with overpopulation. So there was never any virus, or at least it was not what they said it was. And so, yeah, this is a thread that goes through the entire book. It's obviously not a major plot point, because if it were a majorly discussed thing, then people wouldn't be believing it. So obviously it has to be a conspiracy theory, but it is a stat very well established in this book that I read it and never had any questions about the fact that it was a conspiracy, that it was a government plot. Now, probably the better question, and something that people have asked in reviews, is why would the population not get it? And they talk extensively about the amount of propaganda that went into this, the amount of education campaigns and public education that went into telling people that there's no way to survive without meat and animal products, all of the scare tactics that were used regarding the virus, all of these things. These are all integral parts of this book. So again, if you missed that entirely, I don't think you read the book very carefully at all. I'm gonna be so mean in this video. I'm so sorry. Moving on from that, we have a 1-star review from Clem. Congrats to this thing for being the worst book I've read all year. If your statement is eating meat is wrong and you wouldn't eat it if you had to make it yourself or if it were human, write a column in some health mag, no one cares. eye-rolling, fake, deep, unsubstantial book that tries too hard to be thought-provoking or shocking, with the torture porn like it's a cheap Saw sequel. If all your characters do is describe actions and surroundings, they're not characters, they're paper towels. Pack it up, Ross Geller. No one wants you here. I have personally never heard a paper towel describe anything, but okay. So I think this kind of ushers in a whole, I only copied a couple of these reviews because there's a lot of them that kind of insinuate that this book is just vegan propaganda. And so we'll just go through a couple of these. Kelsey Hinz, what the actual F? I honestly don't even know what the hell I read. I find it really hard to separate the fact that this author is vegan and that this book is anything more than vegan propaganda. Her ultimate goal had to be to get others to go vegetarian or vegan upon finishing this novel. Blah, blah, blah. I actually had to look up the author due to how misogynistic the writing was. I thought no way that this was written by a woman. Well, I was wrong. Blah, blah, blah. More about how far-fetched the virus plot is and the fact that, you know that people can be vegetarian. The book tackles nothing of the societal issues that exist and would still exist and come into play here. All of this just furthers the point that this book was graphic for the sake of being graphic, and the end game is just pushing vegan propaganda. We will get into this. The last one of these is Emma. In order to believe this book is anything other than disturbing for disturbing's sake, you have to buy into its worldview even a little. And I don't. I just don't see the world this way. I don't believe that humans are this unendingly susceptible to propaganda and unempathetic in their hearts. It feels like creative writing 101 allegory to me. Oh, factory farming is bad, so let's make animals replace with humans. And then people will realize it's bad. It's neither necessary nor new nor altogether an accurate metaphor. So then in the comments, someone said, I felt so differently. This book was an indictment of the horrors of factory farming. It was also an indictment of people who ignore injustice and embrace cruelty if it benefits their own personal comfort, personal profit, and or social conformity. They go on, but she says, I got the factory farming an indictment of humanity, but honestly it differs from my worldview. I don't think humans and animals are the same, and I don't think humans are so unfeeling. And then someone else said, this went beyond factory farming, and she said, I'm glad this book worked for you, and I don't think authorial intent matters as much as reader perception, but this book is intended to be about factory farming. So, the thing about making broad statements about what authors intended for books is that, you should probably be right when you make those statements. And it is true that this book is certainly about factory farming, and the author is a vegan, I believe, or vegetarian at the very least. But there's an article in the Irish Times that I will link below that says, I have always believed that in our capitalist consumerist society, we devour each other. And, the beginning of the article is about factory farming and eating meat and how she came up with this idea partially to combat that. But it also says, although my book contains clear criticism of the meat industry, I also wrote the novel because I have always believed that in our capitalist consumerist society, we devour each other. We phagocyte each other in many ways and in varying degrees. Human trafficking, war, precarious work, modern slavery, poverty, gender violence are just a few examples of extreme violence. Objectivizing and depersonalizing others allows us to remove them from the category of human being, our equal, and place them in the category of a mere other, whom we can be violent to, kill, discriminate against, hurt, etc. So this goes on, and I think that it's a great thing to read, but again, this directly goes against what she says, and I think this is my core problem with most of the criticisms of this book, is that people who, I'm just gonna say it, people who eat meat in general got so defensive reading this book that they failed to see other angles. Yes, this is obviously a book about factory farming. This is obviously about the ways that our society does not care about any non-human life whatsoever, and does not care not just about their lives, in that we kill them, but we don't care what kind of unspeakable harm comes to them during their lives. But if you look even a millimeter under that plot line, or under that, construct of this book, there is so much else here. Like, this book has so much to say on both the very, very obvious factory farming, animal cruelty level, and on so many other levels. And I think that's something that these people are just totally glossing over because they were so caught up in the factory farming angle. And this person, you have to buy into its worldview, and I don't. I just don't see the world this way. I don't believe that humans are this unendingly susceptible to propaganda and unempathetic in our hearts. I'm sorry, that's nice that you view the world that way, but that is not true. Humans are unendingly susceptible to propaganda, and we are unempathetic. Not on a personal, person-to-person level usually, but that is the point of this book. This book goes so hard on language, on how we can use language to distance ourselves from people. If you don't view the world this way, then your worldview is not including people working at the Shein, factories that we have been hearing about in exposés just recently. It doesn't include child workers around the world. It doesn't include people working in mines, including child workers in Africa to get the metal that goes into our phones. It doesn't include the factory farm workers, to be honest, producing the meat that you are eating, who are sick and treated terribly and have long-term health impacts from the work that they do in order for you to eat meat. It doesn't include the people who make our clothes, the people who make our electronics, the people who take apart our electronics, whose health is completely destroyed and their environment is completely destroyed by the fact that we just discard electronics like it's nothing. There are so many ways that our society is exactly like this. And all we need is enough space to not have to think about it. And that space can come physically, and for those of us in the West, that is often the case. We are so physically separate from these things that we honestly can go about our days pretending that it doesn't exist. There are, of course, many, many atrocities happening right in front of us, but the vast majority of them we can get away with completely ignoring because we are physically separate from them. But the other way that works is by dehumanizing the people that are involved and by distancing ourselves with our language and with our emotions. So, yes, this book was written very detached, and that comes up in multiple of these reviews, but that was on purpose. That was the point. So we will move on to another review. So Beth Brown says, this book sells itself to you on the basis of a dystopian future, blah, 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 except it's never properly explained why the world and its inhabitants resorted to this. There's an idea batted around that the virus isn't actually real, blah, blah, blah. I need more than people will go along with whatever they're told is fine. Because we don't. The climate revolution and veganism is testament to that. I refuse to believe that in a world like this there wouldn't have been vocal dissent to the atrocities that occur, but there isn't. Well, first of all, it does mention in here that there are still vegetarians. And, I'm sorry, the climate revolution and veganism, 1% of the planet is vegan. In the US, I think 5% of the population is even vegetarian. That is a very, very small percent. You cannot say that, oh wow, people just really don't go along with whatever they're told is fine. We do. By and large, Overwhelmingly, we do. The vast majority of the human population in the West continues to buy fast fashion, continues to regularly upgrade and purchase electronics that we do not need, and then continue to discard electronics to unknown locations. We continue to support all kinds of industries, including fossil fuels and everything else that we know are damaging, partially because it is made logistically difficult to avoid doing that by systems like the ones put in place here, and also because we are really good at pretending that atrocities are not happening when we are given a very good way of doing that. We are given an avenue to pretend that it's not happening. We are great at it. Now, this review I actually do think has some interesting points, and that I agree with. They said, you would think that a concept such as imagine what the world would be like if humans were treated the way we treat animals in factory farms would have a lot to say. Just think about the fact that in the western part of the world, most people don't think twice about eating certain animals as food, but will get disgusted, enraged, and even downright racist when other cultures in other parts of the world eat animals Westerners don't view as food animals, etc., etc. The point is, a book with this concept could tackle some serious societal issues: environmental destruction, racism, health, food insecurity, speciesism, etc. As I entered this book and continued reading through it, I often wondered, are we going to examine which humans are deemed food humans in a meaningful way? Does it even matter? Does race, class, sexuality, or anything come into play in this near future dystopian world that so closely could resemble our own? And the answer is no, because this book unpacks nothing. Of course, I don't need, and I know many other readers don't need, literature or any form of entertainment to have a big, glaring moral spoon-fed to me, but if a book is to be this grotesque in its depictions, I do think it should either go completely nihilistic, and thus let that speak for itself, or have at least something compelling to show for it. I think overall this book felt incomplete to me, and that's my biggest gripe. Personally, I do think that this book was pretty nihilistic. I do think so, but I do agree with what this reviewer is saying overall. I think that this handled it more than maybe the reviewer is giving it credit for. It does talk about how immigrants and unhoused people, poor people in general, were specifically targeted for this. I would have liked more discussion of race, but I do know that Argentina has a very complex racial makeup. I don't want to speak on something that I really know nothing about, but I don't know if that factored into the way that it's discussed in this, but I really do wish that she had talked about it more. It is mentioned, but I do agree that I would have liked that to be discussed a lot more. But in general, as far as the unpacking of things and the discussion of people accepting it, I actually liked that she didn't discuss that very much, because to me, again, this is how our world is. Certainly, it's a little bit more recent in this book than it is in our world, but, in some ways, not really, like, none of us, I said this in my Instagram review, none of us asked to be born into a world in which, people around the globe work in absolutely appalling, horrific conditions in order to sustain the lifestyle that we are accustomed to and that we kind of have to uphold in the West. None of us asked for that. We did not, choose to be born into this world. So there's really no context needed. Like, we were all just dropped into this world. And in a much the same way that everyone in this kind of just finds themselves carried along in this societal wave. And yeah, of course, they should have, had uprisings and stuff to prevent this, but they didn't, and we didn't either. Nobody stopped anything that has happened in the world so far. Like, obviously, things have been stopped in the world, but like, the current atrocities that are happening right now, none of us have done enough to stop them. So stop being like, how could people allow this to happen? Because that is the point. How did we allow this to happen? Like, oh my god. Okay, anyway, next. Okay, so this is basically about the writing She does, of course, mention how implausible the premise is, which, like, I just don't care, bro. This is a thought experiment. Anyway, the writing was quite clinical in a way that makes everything very surface level and not very compelling. That is the point. If they are, describing babies being human, delightful little infants being born in a factory farm and talking about, eating people, then this probably would have never happened. So the whole point is how clinical and detached this is. Anyway, the characters in this book seem to fall into archetypal categories. They're not nuanced at all. On the one hand, you have the psychopaths who are obsessed with killing, and on the other hand, you have the rest of the population who seems too dumb to question whatever the government wants them to believe. There's no way people wouldn't confront their governments, especially in the age of social media, and it is doubtful that no rebellions take place or that people refuse to eat human meat. You guys just have a better opinion, I think, of humanity than I do. That's all I have to say. Again, I do think that it talks about how controversial this was at the time, but they overcame the controversy and it went into effect, and then everybody just accepted it because it was just the way that it was. And I think that, again, I don't think that necessarily this exact thing would happen, but that's not the point. That's not the point. Okay, so this one, Holly says, if I could give this book negative 10 stars, I would. I understand that this book is meant to be a metaphor for the meat industry and animal abuse, but holy fuck, this was so fucked up. The scenes made me feel sick to my stomach. Blah, blah, blah. I felt so physically ill after reading 150 pages of this book I couldn't stop shaking. The things described in this book didn't push the boundaries of comfort and enter into the horror sphere. No, this author described things that no one should be able to come up with. It was so disturbing I couldn't drink, eat, or sleep. Again, I believe this author wanted to make her audience uncomfortable and wanted them to think about this maltreatment of animals in the food industry, but some of the stuff she came up with is so backwards and horrifying, I'm concerned for her sanity. Sorry, but I never want to see or think of this book ever again. This author did not come up with anything. Anything. Everything that she described in this book is done to animals. I mean, literally everything. There was descriptions in here of using pregnant women's blood or urine, I think, for medication. That is something that is done to horses. It is controversial and it has kind of gone out of prevalent use, but it is a thing that happened. Like, nothing in this book did she come up with on her own. Every single thing that I read in this book that was done to humans was something that I specifically knew of being done to animals. Every single thing. If you think that she made anything up in this book, you are vastly underestimating how cruel we are to animals. Vastly. So be horrified by our world, not by this book. Well, you can be horrified by the book too, that's fine. Okay, this is another one that I think kind of has a point. This is Lucas Anthony. Tender is the Flesh is a novel that is in love with its own concept, and despite my score, I will say that I don't mean that as a negative. It's very clear that Bazterrica knew exactly what she wanted to do while writing this novel, blah blah blah. Yet a novel can't stand on its concept alone, and sadly that's exactly what Tender is the Flesh seems to think it can do. An intriguing world, be it dystopian or not, is nothing without intriguing characters or plot. Kind of lacks both of these things, blah blah blah. It's also a novel that wants to have it both ways, in that it seems to enjoy shocking the reader and being as gruesome as it can be, but also wants you to sympathize with its main character, who actively works at the factory. I don't think that you're supposed to sympathize with the main character at all. I hated the main character, and I think that this is also where people who think that this is super misogynistic, which it is, but people who think that she is super misogynistic are confused, because I think it's our character who is extremely misogynistic. I don't think you're supposed to like him. I don't think you're supposed to sympathize with him at all. So I don't understand where that came from. But I will say this novel does pretty much stand on concept alone, and I don't have a problem with that. To me, that's a risky move. It's a bold move to do as an author, because your concept needs to be impeccable. Your concept needs to be amazing and totally worth it. And to me, I think that this was a solid choice as something that stands on concept alone. But yeah, there's not really a plot. Like, there is a plot, but the plot doesn't matter. And certainly no characters that you are, like, invested in or interested in, like, emotionally. No, this is a concept novel. I will agree with that. So this is an interesting one. Wendy says, I can't say I loved this one. I barely liked it. And it's not even the horrifying premise and disturbing details that bothered me. I wanted more of that, actually. I wanted more insight into the evil government that imposed the legitimate slaughtering of humans for consumptions that may or may not have all been a farce. I wanted more scientific descriptions of the slaughtering. That's an unpopular opinion right there. I wanted a more in-depth look at the social ramifications of this transition because by 50% I was so bored. I can see that perspective. Again, like I said, there were certain aspects specifically of the social, like cultural effects and factors that I did think would have been really interesting to see more discussion of. But as far as seeing kind of behind the curtain, again, I kind of liked that we didn't because, again, that is how it is for us. Obviously, we know, like, a fair amount of the general concept of who is behind a lot of the atrocities in the world, but really, we don't see behind that curtain in our world either. So I kind of liked that, again, it's just this is the way that society is, that is how it was framed. This is just how it is. It's just how it is. And the fact that we just accept that, just like they do, I don't know, I thought it was pretty successful. So that is all of the reviews that I had saved. And so I think my wrap-up thoughts would just be that, again, personally for me, I am very opposed to factory farming, to eating animals at all. I am a vegetarian. I am not a vegan. So for me, that part was not, like, controversial. But I think even if you are an animal eater, just look past that. Like, again, I think that you shouldn't look past it. But even if you are not interested in the animal cruelty parts of this at all, be interested in the human cruelty parts of this, because as much as some of these reviewers want to believe that we as society do not allow things like this to happen, we just allow different and watered down versions of things like this to happen. And it's very heavy-handed. It is an allegory. It is very aggressive. It is a thought experiment. It is a concept novel, you know, as we just discussed, but personally, I think that it has a lot to say about the things we accept as society, the things that we are just dropped into as consumers in a capitalist world. So anyway, I would love to hear thoughts in the comments whether you hated this or loved it, and I will see you in the next video.